Okay, we're back again, and I'm sorry it's been a while since I've done a video, although I think it's been about a week. Lots has happened, lots has gone on. I guess wrestling fans now have something in common with Kendra Lust, because like Kendra Lust, or like wrestling fans, Kendra Lust has had John Cena shoved down her throat. Now, that's not what I'm going to talk about. What I want to talk about is MMA based and something that's linked to both. But the first thing I really want to talk about is Ronda Rousey and Cris Cyborg and this whole scenario that's been going on with those two for the better part of the last maybe 6 to 7 months. And there's been a lot of things said between both camps, and a lot of people, I gather, really want to see that fight. A lot of people had different ideas about when we would see that fight. Maybe the two of them would coach an all-female season of The Ultimate Fighter, because then that could really help build a future women's division. I mean, get more women inspired, build some new stars. It could really be a boom for that division. That was one idea, and then the other idea is that they would just fight right away in the UFC. And there was a lot of discussion about what weight that would happen at, and some people thought, well, Ronda's been at 145, so she could fight Cyborg at 145, but Ronda would rather defend the belt and fight her at 135, and there's discussion about, how they're going to do that. And Cyborg wants to fight in the 145-pound division and said that the most should go down to 140. And there's been this discussion about what weight class, the who, where, whys, and whats. That's been the problem. And right now we're at a point where Cris Cyborg is now out of the UFC and is now with Invicta. And here are my thoughts on this. Had Cris Cyborg not been suspended last year for her wellness failure, for whatever it was she was taking, had that not happened, people would be more sympathetic and would side with Cyborg in this. The fact that she failed what she failed on and looks the way she looks, people are already suspicious of how she looks and how, people are always suspicious about how she's looked. And now we have been given good reason to believe, you can't get any better than a failed test. And because of that, that does not make her a sympathetic character. People might not like Ronda Rousey, but they are more than likely going to side with her because Ronda does have a point, and Ronda hasn't actually, from what we know of, done anything illegal or been found with anything illegal. So really the ball is in her court in a lot of ways, more so than Cyborg's. Now, there's been so many opinions on, Ronda has already fought at 145 before, she should just go back up. Whereas Ronda's saying, no, fuck that, you get off the steroids or whatever else you're taking and go down to 135. And again, people on Cyborg's camp are saying, well, it's not physically possible because it would damage her if she cuts any more weight or loses all this weight. It could damage her vital organs in terms of having to reproduce and have children. And a lot of that has been said. And in my opinion, I can see why Ronda has the point. Because, again, if Cyborg got off of the things that she was taking, and hopefully she is off whatever it was she was taking, and I'm saying I don't believe that, within the space of 3 months that's possible, but maybe within a year, maybe that they could do that, maybe, and that's my belief. I think that maybe if she really looked into it with a dietitian and the right strength and conditioning people, she could safely get herself to 135. That might mean toning down on muscle mass, doing a bit more cardio and things of that nature, but I don't think it's completely, unachievable. Now, if it was more of a fear that if she loses the weight, if her weight goes up and down, it's going to affect her speed and things like it did with Roy Jones Jr. If that argument was used, I could somewhat understand it. That's not the argument being used, and there's several different arguments being used, and it looks like for now we're not going to see that fight. And I mean, it's disappointing. I would love to see that fight. Women's MMA really can thrive on. Basically, this is my stance. Women's MMA needs several big fights to happen for there to be a future in that division. Now, we already had the run with Gina Carano, and that was a good starting point. Prior to that, there was Tara La Rosa, and you had other fighters like Erin Tohill coming up. Then you had Gina Carano, who became the star in 06, 07, 08. And then you had the potential feud with her and Cyborg, which was the first Strikeforce main event, I think, women's main event on the Strikeforce, and that was very big, and that I think did a lot for women's MMA and got a lot of people watching. Then you had the Cyborg run for a while where she was just destroying people, and then you had what happened with Gina Carano leaving for a while, Cyborg going on a tear, and then you had the 135-pound weight class with talent like Marlos Kunin, who I like watching fight, and Miesha Tate. Then Miesha Tate looked like she was stepping up into that role to replace Gina Carano as the pretty face star of that division. And then as she was on her way up, Ronda Rousey, like a female Kurt Angle, just crept up out of nowhere. And then they had the fight that they had, and that was another big fight for women's MMA. And now the next big fight for women's MMA, you could say a rematch between Miesha and Ronda is a big one, and I mean, I would pay to see that, and that would be interesting to see. But the next fight, and the fight that matters to everybody, is Cris Cyborg, Ronda Rousey. There's an angle there. There appears to be some legitimate heat there. There's been a war of words. It's a fight where both fighters are viewed as unbeatable and untouchable. Ronda, we haven't really seen her being put under any kind of pressure in a fight or made to backpedal in a fight. We've seen her tap people out within the first round in very dominant fashion. She's an excellent grappler. We've seen Cris Cyborg just destroy people in her weight class, overwhelm them physically. And it is, when you put those things into the equation, a very interesting fight. But it's like, who is right and who is wrong? And in my opinion, I believe that Ronda and people on Ronda's side of the thing are right. And I also believe that, and this is just my thought, I'm not too sure about Tito, the strategy that they had. My belief and what I've heard is this, that they were hoping to get more money and pull a power play so they could get the fight on their terms, and that's what fighters want to do. They want the fights on the terms that they want. However, it doesn't work because, okay, it worked for Tito when Tito was in his prime fighting, but you have to take into account that that strategy worked because Tito was one of the biggest stars in MMA. He had a crossover appeal, and in comparison to that, Cyborg doesn't have that yet. Cyborg is a big star within the MMA community, but I don't see her as a crossover star in the same way that Tito was. And that's why it worked for Tito, but it's not working for Cyborg. And then I saw the press conference, and clearly they still want to do the Rousey-Cyborg fight. They still want to keep the angle going. But it's like, okay, she's going to Invicta, that's fine, that's cool. If she's going to be an Invicta, she might as well start talking about Invicta and who she's going to fight there. And there aren't two, and again, this is the other thing. To me, yes, she can have some fights and tune herself up and maybe in the interim get her body down to 135 comfortably, or be able to get herself down there to 135 comfortably, and in the interim get some tune-up fights. So she should start talking about what she's doing in Invicta. Instead, in that press conference, all she talked about was Ronda Rousey, Ronda Rousey, Ronda Rousey, Ronda Rousey. She even wore a t-shirt, Ronda Rousey is my bitch. And yeah, that's great for marketing and promotion, but here's the thing, you're not going to fight her right now. Your next fight is with someone else on April, or maybe in April 27th. So you should really be talking about that now because you've signed to fight that person. I think we will see that fight. Let's just say that. And I want to know what people think. Do you think that we will see this fight? Who do you think is in the right and who do you think is in the wrong? Do you think that Rousey is in the right or in the wrong? Do you think that Cyborg is in the right and the wrong? Do you think that the management of Cyborg might have the wrong concept or the wrong idea? Do you think that Cyborg realistically, with the right amount of time, could get herself to a weight where she could get to 135 without causing herself any health problems? I believe it is not exactly impossible. I believe that she could do it. I believe without the performance and the heart, so she's still a great athlete. I have seen her pictures of her, and they're on Google, when she was a handball athlete, and she was a great athlete as a handball athlete. Very, very good athlete. So I know she's got the athletic ability with or without the things. And it seems like to me that the performance enhancers were used for more of a marketing thing, so they can make her this monstrous cyborg woman, Terminator type. So, anyways, you let me know what you think about that. And now the next thing I want to talk about. Now, many of you would be surprised to hear this, but I do follow wrestling, and I'm not talking about professional wrestling. I'm talking about the actual sport wrestling, and I like to stay up to date with it. I like to know who's coming up and who's doing what, where and when, because you never know when some of these guys will end up in MMA or in pro wrestling. So I always like to keep an eye on that and follow what's going on. And obviously, I mean, I enjoyed seeing Kel Sanderson wrestle. I enjoyed seeing Alexander Karelin wrestle. I enjoyed seeing Kurt Angle wrestle in the Olympics. Daniel Cormier wrestle. Stephen Neal wrestle. Brock. I watch a lot of that because I want to kind of see some of those things. And wrestling is a very, it's got a rich and very deep history. So I was very surprised this week when I found out that wrestling would be dropped from the Olympics 2020. And there's a lot of concern amongst people on YouTube and in the news. And I was even surprised with all the public figures that have come out and spoken about this. And for me, I would have an even bigger problem if they cut the Olympics and then they started cutting college funding too, because now that's really going to affect the sport. I know a lot of people who competed in wrestling. I know families who have children who've competed in wrestling, and I've got a training partner who wrestled, and I've got people from my gym from Russia who wrestled, and they've been talking about this a lot. And the way it was explained to me is this: from a very young age, most of them, they get into the sport of wrestling because they want to compete in the Olympics, because that means a lot to them. And from the age of maybe 5 to 6, when they first hit that wrestling mat, that's what they're thinking about, that's what they're training for, They want to have that moment. And when you look at it in the inside, you have to really love and feel very passionate about that sport, because it's not a glamorous sport, right? This is not male models pretending to be football players like we have in the Premiership. This is a very tough, gritty, down and dirty sport where you go through a ton of hardships to get to each level higher and higher and higher into progress. And the NCAAs, they have a lot of meaning. The World Championships within wrestlers mean something, but to the rest of the world and to society, having an Olympic medal in wrestling means more than anything, and it's somewhat gives them, I don't even want to say legitimacy because it's the right word I'm looking for. It's more socially accepted than a world championship, even though world championship in wrestling means a lot. An Olympic medal, you say you had an Olympic medal, people know who you are. And I mean, I'll even say this, the publicity we had, when we had the Olympics here last year, and the publicity all the Olympic athletes got in London was just phenomenal. I mean, you pretty much knew every face of everyone competing. And to take that away from Olympic wrestlers, from these kids, from these athletes that all they've dreamed about, you know, from the age that they started, from a very young age, to take that away from them, I mean, that doesn't sit well with me, and I think that's really going to hurt the future of the sport, to be honest with you. And I could see it having an effect on MMA. I could see it having an effect on pro wrestling. Maybe a good and bad effect on pro wrestling. Maybe you might get more amateur wrestlers going into professional wrestling, and maybe you'll get some more amateur wrestlers going into MMA. But it hurts their bargaining power, because I believe that if you've got an Olympic gold medal, you're wanted more. And I believe that Kurt Angle was offered a significantly better deal because he had the gold medal by the WWE or the WWF at the time, because of that accomplishment. And I think that's going to hurt them in that way. And I think it's going to hurt the future of the sport, because now a lot of these young kids coming up, when they're thinking of a sport to do that they want to go into the Olympics with, and potentially compete in the Olympics, in the not the Pan Am Games, but the Olympics, they're not going to be looking at doing wrestling now, and that's going to affect the future, and that concerns me. And I agree with a lot of people. I mean, you go on Twitter and you go on the internet, you see a lot of people speaking about it. Kurt Angle speaking about it, Dolph Ziggler spoke about it, Biggie Langston spoke about it, Cody Rhodes, Drew McIntyre, Carl Sanderson spoke about it, Dana White has spoken about it, UFC fighters have been speaking about it, a lot of people are talking about it, and there's this trending hashtag save wrestling going around, and I agree. I think wrestling needs to be saved. I think it's one of the earliest sports in the Olympics. It's a big part of the Olympics. And when you look at some of the other sports, and no disrespect, but speed walking is being kept on and wrestling's being taken away, okay, I don't quite get that. And I've also been told, though, that there's some political decisions or motives behind it, because apparently the people who have made the votes to have wrestling off are countries that don't necessarily have wrestling. And one of the main people in there, that I can't remember the name, but apparently his son is a pentathlete, and he's voting to keep he's voting to keep that sport in by keeping wrestling out, and I've been told that's one of the motives. So it's very interesting to see, and I mean, it's been interesting. So many people have come out and spoken about this and think that this is a bad thing, and I agree. This could really hurt the sport of wrestling. If it's going to be kept off of 2020 and it's going to be kept off the next future Olympic event, and then it eventually comes back, you're going to really hurt the quality of wrestlers, the development of wrestlers in the future, because that's going to affect funding, that's going to affect the quality training partners, that's going to affect the quality of coaching, because people are going to want to distance themselves from it. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. I'm sorry if I did not sound so eloquent and so articulate today. I had a really, really, really long weekend with just stuff going on with work and everything. You write your comments. You let me know what you think. Anyone watching Elimination Chamber, I won't be watching it live because I've got to get up very early tomorrow. So you let me know what happens about that. You write what happens. I don't mind spoilers. Put them on my wall if you want to. That's cool. I'm going to head out. Also, check the description down below. I've got some people on there I want to shout out. Some channels I think you would be interested in watching. I'm going to head out. I need to sleep. I need to drink my tea. So I'm going to wrap up. Guys, take care. It's been a pleasure, and I shall see you all very soon.